Lunch and enjoyed the poster session. We've now got a session coming up that's basically centered around urban analytics, or smart cities if you like. And the first speaker in our session will be Mark Johnson, who joins us from the Kent Police, and he'll be talking about policing and the context of criminal networks. So I will hand it over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I almost didn't make it today. 20 minutes into my journey, my car started flashing red lights at me, so I'm really glad to be here to talk to you this afternoon. Just a little bit of background about me. Head of analysis at Kent Police. What does that mean exactly? So any kind of analytics that we undertake, be that crime, intelligence, performance, evaluation, then I look after that. You may have heard of us around the use of predpol, predictive policing. So that is very much short-term prediction around where risk is today, and it forms really our default patrol strategy. So officers visit boxes that they see on Google Maps about half the size of a football pitch, and they police those areas, they police what they see. Our chief refers to it as 21st century technology meets good old-fashioned policing, and it's a really good example of two things: technology meeting things that we're very familiar with and working. And then there's the Kent Quality Performance Framework, which is something probably you haven't heard of, but there's a huge movement in policing now to stop abusing statistics, stop using reds and greens, and actually bring data back into context, so making sure that we're actually using statistics in a meaningful way. We played a big role in that. In terms of myself, currently doing a PhD in mental health and policing, so if there's anybody studying mental health, be really interested to talk to you. And I'm also a serving special. I've been doing that for 8 years. So some of the things I'll talk about today, I've got some operational experience as a volunteer police officer. So I'm going to talk to you today about organised crime in the context of the government strategy, local to global. What does that mean exactly? Well, the example I always use is if you take shoplifting, a fairly trivial offence, but you add to the fact that some people may be trafficked into the country, brought in under false pretences, then threatened and told that they must work for a criminal network, work off the debt. That often links to what we call bulk shoplifting, so gangs hitting towns very quickly and moving out. So what you've got there is organised criminality, people trafficking, very vulnerable people, local activity linked to global activity. We often find as well that some of the organised networks that we deal with are also linked to international terrorism as well, so they may be involved in the sale of drugs, which may be paying for arms that are used in Aleppo and things like that. And the government's recognised that and really pushing on this local to global strategy, which is, I was in Germany recently, and they are following a very similar pattern as well to us. So I will be focusing primarily on the local perspective, talk a little bit about what we do, case study around gang activity in Kent and current work in the next steps. I must admit, I do feel like a little bit of a fraud, which is interesting given I work for the police. I'm not a network scientist. I'm not really here today to talk about statistical networks, but I am here today to tell you about what we're doing around networking and the fact that we are at a threshold, and that we want to learn more about statistical network analysis, how we can use our data in order to stop and prevent crime and keep people safe. So just a little bit of information around organised crime. Globally, big business, so any serious syndicate is earning in the region of about $1.5 billion a year. The international drugs market is estimated to be around $200 billion, and cybercrime, which we're only really beginning to understand, you're looking at around $1 trillion per year globally. So it is big business, and there is a lot of money being generated by it. You look at the more local picture, so the security services and the Strategic Defence and Security Review have now listed this as a Tier 2 risk. There are 3 tiers, Tier 1 being something that's imminent and happening at the moment, Tier 2 being something that is building and is going to affect us, and organised crime, traditionally level 3, now Tier 2. So it's growing and it's getting more involved in the use of technology and data, and we need to catch up with that. In terms of economic and social harm, UK between 20 and 40 billion each year. So it's a significant factor for us, and it is something that we need to deal with at a local level as well as globally. So in terms of the local perspective for Kent, this is what we call, this is our control strategy. If we gather our intelligence, we look at the demand that's facing us, and then we identify areas that are beyond what we call business as usual or day-to-day business. That's not to say that day-to-day business isn't in there, but these are what you might call the big ticket issues that are affecting us at the moment. And you'll see there child sexual exploitation, human trafficking, domestic abuse, gangs, high impact crime, counter-terrorism. All these things are linked. All of these things are linked together. There's not one that operates independently from the other. So if we're looking at gangs, then we know we'll find high harm impact crime there. We know there may be links to terrorism. There'll certainly be violence and domestic abuse, human trafficking, and child sexual exploitation. And what we are looking for from big data, if you like, is to try and understand and get ahead of things like this or activity related to these 6 key areas in Kent. And I would say if you went to any other force and you looked at their control strategy, it would be very similar to this one. And if you look at the national control strategy for policing, then you will see these areas in there. So before I go into the case study, into what we're doing around network analysis, something that's very important to us is population. Understanding our population. We've only really grasped that over the last 2 or 3 years, understanding whether we've got vulnerable groups, whether there are groups that are more likely to be susceptible to becoming a victim of crime, but equally those groups that are more likely to commit crime. And we've built up a quite an extensive knowledge in terms of operational knowledge, in terms of police officers understanding their areas, understanding those families that are more likely to come in contact with the police, but we've not really applied any statistical science to it until recently. What we do now is we've purchased mosaic data. We mix that with our own data. We've also got our predictive model in there as well. And what you'll see here is 3 groups that are more likely to be a victim and equally more likely to be a perpetrator of crime, and they are the same groups. So those same 3 groups have both of those risks within them. Here, municipal challenge, only 1.6% of the population, but we find that 5.7% of our predpol boxes land within about 100 metres of where these people are. So you're finding much more risk or day-to-day risk in terms of those groups, equally with family basics, 8.2, 14.5, 7.7, and 20.9. We understand this. We understand where these people live. The big caveat to all of this is that these data rely on the crime that is reported to us, and they rely on the crime that we tend to deal with, which is changing. You might associate this with crime that's often referred to as blue collar or street crime. So there's not a lot of fraud in there at the moment, although that is changing. So that is the caveat around these groups. These groups at the moment, this is how they stand, but we expect them to change in the future as we start to understand more about fraud and other crimes that are happening in cyberspace that really we're only just starting to understand and grasp. That's just a visual representation of Group O in Maidstone, and you'll see there our predictive policing boxes over a 3-month period. The black dots are where the social groups are located, or where that social group is located in Maidstone, predominantly urban, and then you've got a distribution of the predictive policing model that we use at the moment. Again, we're only really using this around proactive patrol, so when our officers aren't being called to an incident, and in policing, that's around about 99% of our time now. A lot of our demand is based around calls into our control centre, go to this, go to that, deal with that, be it a 999 or a non-emergency call. But when our officers do have proactive patrol time, we are using these kind of data and this predictive model in order to say to them, go there, use your skills, police what you see. What we're not doing, and what we'd like to do, is taking these data and then applying it to what I'll show you next around how we analyse networks. We're not really grasping big data in its truest sense, although I think we are at a threshold where that's the next phase for us, or the next move. So I thought I'd just talk to you today about gangs, give you a quick case study and an overview about an issue we have in Kent, an emerging issue that's really sort of sprung up over the last 3 years. Background to that is we are a force, gateway to Europe, but also sandwiched in between that and London. Metropolitan Police, really successful at dealing with gang issues. Operation Trident, you may have heard of that. Very successful operation. Almost 20 years in the making, have a very good understanding of the gangs on their patch, if you like. What that's meant for us is that they've been dealing with the gangs very well. Some of the gangs now are turning away from London and looking at surrounding counties. You may have heard of terms such as county lines, things like that. That refers to drug lines that are coming out of the capital city and into Kent. That's how it emerged. What you then found as well were gang members being displaced, so they've been caught by the Metropolitan Police, put into prison, and then located in counties surrounding London. Very often with us, North Kent, I don't know if you're familiar with Kent, so that would be Medway, Gravesend, Dartford. So you can see a picture building where we started to face a problem along our border with London, but also interestingly along our coastline, where we were seeing what we would refer to as London-based gangs, so gangs that are predominantly about the distribution of drugs. There is other things involved there, and that come with a high level of violence. So we've currently got 46 known gangs. You can see how they're spread across Kent. 247 known drug lines, and you may or may not have heard of some of the gangs there: Woolwich Boys, GDM, Gas Gang, SUK, all well-established gangs, been around for about 20 to 30 years in London and now located in Kent. So what are we doing about it? Well, first of all, it's understanding where they are, the spread, predominantly based around urban areas, and equally levels of activity. So you'll see there the numbers there, that's the amount of gangs we've got in place. Adds up to more than the figure I showed you before, but some gangs operate in more than one area. And equally what they're up to. I hope you can see those purple dots there. What I'm using there is that is possession with intent to supply drugs. So we understand where they are, how many of them there are, where they're located, and the demand that they're generating, so the things that we're trying to stop them doing. Only part of the picture though. What you'll notice there, we don't really, at the minute, we haven't put in some of the data that I showed you earlier around population and what our predictive policing is telling us. So what we've become quite good at is understanding communications data, starting to pick up on data from social media. What you can see here is a network chart, or the beginnings of a network chart, based on 3 or 4 key individuals. And what we focus on is 2 areas around information flow. So which information is flowing, what is it, are we interested in it, and who is controlling that information flow. And those are the 2 predominant areas we look at. We build a network chart from that, so you see you've got subjects in the center, and then subjects that are linked to them via those 2 areas. So information flow and who's actually controlling that information. What that results in then is a picture that you can see there, where we begin to understand who we need to look into, or in policing terms, who we need to take out, who we need to make sure that we're putting them in prison, or we're preventing them from committing more crimes. That could be following an Al Capone-based strategy, where they didn't actually get Al Capone for the criminal activity that he undertook, but they got him for tax fraud, tax evasion. So sometimes we follow that kind of model. Really important point here, what we then do with this structured data, so the structured communication data, so that could be via telephone or Twitter or Facebook, for example, we then overlay it with unstructured data. This is a really key point for us in policing. Unstructured data are really important to us, and any sort of big data solution needs to incorporate that in it as well. So what you've got there is, we understand who's saying what, who's controlling it, who's saying what to whom, We overlay intelligence, and that gives us an indication of what people are doing, why, whether they're armed, whether they're using firearms, whether there's violence involved, and the drug networks or names of those networks and locations. So it's a combination of structured statistical analysis, but then also overlaying that with unstructured data. And I would say we're very good at doing that at a sort of a small level at the moment. You can see there we're interested in one particular small network with 4 key individuals linked to many others. What we haven't grasped yet is sort of expanding that to, what Kent looks like, what the southeast might look like, what, policing UK may well look like, and beyond. Current work, I think it's a really important point to make that we are in the business of stopping things. So for us, and we often say this to people, for us success is putting our feet up. So if there's nothing to do, then we've done our job, because we're not trying to create anything, we're trying to stop things. And so we often use, when we're looking at, the government talk to us about productivity, I'm often saying to them, when we got an inverse relationship with it, we want to stop things. So any data that we use needs to be sort of borne, that needs to be borne in mind. That's our primary role. We are beginning to look at big data. We're particularly interested in push technology. So we're working with a small company at the minute based at the University of Manchester, where the software will actually push information to us that we weren't aware of in relation to some analysis that we may be carrying out, some investigation. So previous slide around understanding a network. We're looking at how we can do that with big data, but we really are at the threshold, but we haven't really grasped big data at all, and certainly not statistical networking. But we're really interested. We need to know about more about our population. We are working with the LSE on that at the moment. Tom Kirchmeier, I don't know if he's working with us at the moment around what our population looks like, what it can tell us about where we might need to intervene, where we might need to intervene in terms of perpetrators, but also keeping people safe. I've mentioned prediction. At the moment, our predictive model is around about the here and now. It's about where risk is today. We want to extend that. We want to look at, although we do use various forms of statistical analysis to predict. Again, we want to take that structured and unstructured data and try and understand what we need to do when and where in order to prevent and stop crime and disorder. And something that we've sort of stumbled upon recently, and it's based really around how we use intelligence, is ensuring that we use our data in terms of strategy, measure, analyse, report, transform. And we do a lot of this: measure, analyse and report. Strategy, in other words, which data do we need in order to ask the right questions? We could be better. And transforming, we could be better as well, and it would be really interesting to talk to any of you about that. Where next? Where we want to be, data and insight rich. Where are we? Data rich, probably not too good around insight. We could be a lot better than we are. And it is really about how we can harness the power from our data. We do have a lot of it, and we do have access to a lot of data as well that belongs to other security agencies. We're really interested in embracing technology, academia and private industry. And something I haven't really touched upon in this presentation, because there just wasn't the room or the time, is cyber-enabled crime. A lot of the things I've talked about today have been more about what you might call more traditional forms of crime. Cyber-enabled crime, same drivers there, the same drivers that we face every day in terms of trying to keep people safe and stop crime. But that is a huge one for us, understanding that and getting on the front foot, getting to somewhere before the criminal fraternity do, because they're certainly using the technology that some of you have been talking about earlier today, and we need to as well. That's me. I've flown through that 20 minutes. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Time for questions and that don't involve putting one's feet up, so I'm sure we can come up with many. So who'd like to start? Okay, well, yeah, go ahead.
I served a short time on the ethics committee at the Met, so I know teeny bit about the subject, but and I shouldn't be saying it really, but you put undercover people into these gangs, and so to what extent are your methods really to try and determine what the right kind of intervention is? It's very dangerous for the individual and stuff like that.
It is, yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of change around undercover police work now. So, following a recent case where there was an officer in place for about 10 years, I mean, I think I suppose people's behaviour and why people do things and how they do it is very important to us, and having a better understanding of that, and then applying that to undercover policing is definitely interesting, but I think we need to be very careful about how we do that. I think something I've heard today that keeps coming up is there's still not enough data, big data, there's still not enough big data in order to understand behaviour or pull nuggets from the data in order for us to help us police in a different or better way than we're doing already. I guess using big data to understand where we need to put those officers, who's the greatest threat. So the example I gave at the beginning of the presentation around, well, you look at something like shoplifting, a fairly sort of trivial crime, if you like, but then you look at it from that perspective, and you've got organised criminality, possibly linked to terrorism, and also people trafficking. And it's being on the front foot or getting ahead of that and understanding who we need to be dealing with, and where to put those precious assets really in terms of undercover policing. So I hope that's answered your question.
Very interesting.
You say your prediction is based on only the reported crime. How do you plug that gap, or how do you determine how big that gap is?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I mean, we try to make that as accurate as we possibly can. So our PredPol, the system that we use from the UCLA, worked with Jeff Branting on it. We only put in around 65% of our demand, and we only put in any crime that has so we take out a domestic MOs, modus operandi, out of that. So it's predominantly street crime. So it's from those. It represents those crimes that have a high reporting level, but it's not perfect by any means, and we recognise that. But what we've seen. So we did a fairly robust test on that. We spoke to colleagues from Cambridge and the UCL on the approach that we took around understanding the impact of PredPol. And despite that, it gave us a predictability of the sort of, where risk is today that my analysts couldn't match. It was sort of, 60% more efficient than anything we could do. And equally as well, what we got from, speaking sort of, from an ethnographic point of view, if you like, the feedback we got from officers, both with sort of long and short service, was that it felt right to them, that they felt they were in places where they could do something, and it was stating the bleeding obvious, if you like, and that some boxes land where any good police officer would go there, and they know they'd probably, they get an arrest, a lawful arrest. But what it was also doing was, it was the boxes that were landing. So you think of it as sort of, in concentric circles, if you like. There were boxes that were landing just next to those areas that you would never look at. I remember going to my first PredPol box and thinking, what on earth am I doing here? I would never come here. But cognitively, I didn't have the ability to we think we know, especially, career PCs, they will have a very good idea or a very good knowledge of their patch, but they don't know everything. And this, what we found is that this, despite some of the gaps in the data, it was still giving us something, that extra edge, that we didn't have before it. But the really important point to make was, it's not the boxes themselves, it's what the officers do when they go there. And we didn't prescribe to them what they should do. We just said, right, here are these boxes. They're not telling you how to be a police officer. what we're saying is that that's a high risk area to dig. Go and police what you see. It was interesting for the officers with a long service. They embraced that. Younger officers who policing is very task orientated, and they were like, "Well, you're not going to tell me what to do." No, we're not. Just go in there and police what you see. And so I would say yes, it's not perfect. The data aren't perfect, but we still see we still get a dividend from it that we don't without it. We don't have without it.
But is there like a control sample? Does it say select 5%, which is very low risk, and you put someone there just to check?
Yeah, we do that. Yeah, I mean, what we did around when we tested it for accuracy, we developed our own boxes, and then and we ran some boxes in an area where it wasn't deployed. Only I knew. Then we retrospectively poured crime onto it, both high and low risk. So we've got an accuracy indicator for all the various different crime types. So we've got an understanding of where it's particularly accurate and where it's not. And of course, some of that is associated with the amount of data we've got. So for example, if you go to Kent, there aren't that many burglaries, so therefore it isn't that strong around burglary. But burglary is a highly reported crime. If you've been burgled, you're going to tell us. So interestingly, the accuracy rate is low there, but it's still relatively high for such a small crime type. So we do have a good understanding. I think it was really important not to do what we normally do in policing and say, we've got this thing and it's going to solve everything. It's the next golden bullet, if you like. It's not. It's a small thing, and lots of small things often add up to answering or solving the large problem. But yes, be happy to send through what we've done on it if you're interested.
Next to that.
You showed us this picture of this small-scale criminal network. What are the challenges you face that prevent you from scaling that up?
I mean, there are the obvious challenges around what we can and can't do with data. So when we can look at data and when we can't. Technology as well. We are like a lot of the public sector. I'll speak very frankly. Our technology isn't as good as it could be. I think we need to be linking in with the likes of yourselves a lot more than we do, but not only from a research point of view, but also from a sort of a business point of view, if you like. And I guess it's skill set as well. I suppose that's linked to what I've just talked about. I've got analysts that have got incredible experience and can look at something like that and can understand it from that art of analysis that you find in any form of analysis. They'll understand something like that from the point of view of that doesn't look right, but we don't have the skills around we don't have the statistical skills. We do have them, but not to the level that you would find it in institutions such as this. So it's a combination of some of the law around what we can and can't do with data is hindering us at the moment, but we're seeing that as a challenge. Obviously, we don't want to be, we only want to be looking at data for the right purpose and when we should. It's about technology and it's about skills, and I think we can't do it ourselves. We've got a bit of a habit in policing of trying to do things internally, and we need to be speaking to people like yourselves really a lot more than we are.
Time for one last question. Yes, go ahead.
Again, with the criminal network, do you have an idea, we sort of talked about stress testing a little bit earlier, about what happens when you remove one of those nodes? Is it fluid enough that within days it reforms? Does it reform with a different structure?
Yeah. I mean, there is a school of thought, and there was a recent undercover police officer talking about this, or an undercover officer talking about it recently, and that in terms of stress testing, it can actually cause more harm. Because if we take out key individuals from a gang, for example, then what that usually results in is some pretty nasty violence in terms of filling that gap. So they'll get involved in some pretty awful things, and whoever comes out on top will fill that gap. So we've got to be careful not to almost be one of the root causes of producing, ultra-violent, obviously I'm exaggerating, but ultra-violent gangs who are far more effective than they currently are. So there's an expression in policing that's often used, you're not going to arrest your way out of it. I think what we're finding now is it's not necessarily about removing those individuals. Of course, if they've committed a crime and we're aware of it, then we'll do what we need to do. But it's more.
It was more of the structure of the network.
Yes.
So does the shape of that network change? Does it
Yeah.
you get more nodes, or do you just end up with the same network shape with a different individual in it and all the fallout that?
Yeah, it can result in more in a change and a change and more, and it's sort of related to what I've just been talking about. It can change. So for us, and again, a greater understanding of that, applying some statistics and some sociology to that would be really helpful for us, because it's understanding what kind of intervention we need to undertake. Is it policing, or is it something else, or is it a combination? It's often a combination, but we do see changes.
Well, thank you, and thanks, Mark. There's lots of great questions and food.